Monte Castelo rises to 1,041 meters above sea level in the northern Apennines of Italy, in the province of Bologna, approximately 74 kilometers south of the Po Valley. Its slopes are steep enough that a man carrying full combat load, roughly 27 kilograms of rifle, ammunition, rations, and gear, must use both hands on the ascent. The rock beneath the thin topsoil is limestone shale, which fractures underfoot and offers no purchase in wet conditions. In January and February of 1945, conditions are almost always wet. When they are not wet, they are frozen. When they are not frozen, they are both. The Germans have been on this mountain since the autumn of 1943. They have had 16 months to study every approach, every draw, every shallow depression that might conceal a man moving uphill. They have registered their mortars on the mule tracks. They have sighted their machine guns to cover the open ground below the tree line with interlocking fields of fire. They have built their fighting positions into the rock itself, using forced labor and military engineering to create something that is no longer simply a defensive line, but a landscape of death. A place where the terrain and the weapons system have become a single unified instrument. The men ordered to take this mountain are Brazilians. They belong to the 1st Infantry Division of the Força Expedicionária Brasileira, the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, the FEB. They are 25,334 soldiers who crossed the Atlantic in 6 separate convoys between July 1944 and February 1945, trained on American doctrine, equipped with American weapons, and fed into the American Fifth Army's line at one of its most demanding points. They have tried to take Monte Castelo before, 3 times in fact, and 3 times the mountain has sent them back. The 4th attempt begins at 06 hours on February 21, 1945. Among the men moving into assault position in the pre-dawn darkness is a 23-year-old private from the interior of Minas Gerais, who has never held a rank above the lowest grade the Brazilian army assigns. His name is Expedito Rezende, and today, in 11 minutes of action on a frozen slope at approximately 900 meters elevation, he will do something that his commanding officers will struggle to explain for the rest of their lives. To understand what is happening on Monte Castelo in February 1945, it is necessary to go back, not just to the beginning of the Italian campaign, but to the specific political and military circumstances that placed a Brazilian division in the middle of a European war in the first place. Brazil enters the Second World War formally on August 22, 1942, not by choice of ideology alone, but by consequence of geography and economics. Between February and August of 1942, German U-boats sink 36 Brazilian merchant ships in the South Atlantic, killing more than 1,000 civilians. Public outrage reaches a level that President Getúlio Vargas, who has until this point maintained careful neutrality, can no longer contain. Brazil declares war on Germany and Italy on August 22, 1942. The declaration is one thing. Fielding an army capable of fighting in Europe is another matter entirely. In 1942, the Brazilian army is not a modern expeditionary force. It is a domestic security institution organized around the suppression of internal unrest, its doctrine outdated, its equipment a mixture of First World War surplus and domestically produced material of uneven quality. Its enlisted ranks are drawn largely from Brazil's rural poor, men who are physically resilient, accustomed to hardship, and in many cases illiterate. The decision to send a division to Europe is driven as much by Vargas's desire for post-war international standing as by any purely military calculus. The Americans, who need Brazilian air bases, ports, and raw materials, are willing partners. General George Marshall personally oversees the agreement to equip, train, and integrate a Brazilian division into the Fifth Army's order of battle. The result is the Força Expedicionária Brasileira, formally organized in August 1943. The 1st Infantry Division, the only FEB division to reach the theater, is built around 3 infantry regiments, the 1st, 6th, and 11th, with supporting arms, including the 1st Artillery Group, equipped with American 105mm M2A1 howitzers. Total authorized strength is approximately 25,134 personnel. The division's shoulder patch, a snake smoking a pipe, derived from the Brazilian popular saying that it would sooner snow in the tropics than Brazil send troops to fight in Europe, becomes one of the war's more quietly ironic emblems. The first FEB elements arrive in Naples in July 1944, absorbed immediately into the Fifth Army's line in the northern Apennines. The Gothic Line they face is the product of German military engineering at its most systematic. 2,375 individual fighting positions, 479 artillery emplacements, 120,000 meters of barbed wire, and an estimated 16 million square feet of minefields, layered in depth across the spine of the Italian peninsula. Each position is mutually supporting, integrated into the topography to deny observation, maximize fields of fire, and channel attacking forces into pre-registered kill zones. Monte Castelo dominates the road junction at Porretta Terme, the primary axis of advance available to the Fifth Army in this sector. As long as German observers hold that summit, any movement along Highway 64 toward Bologna is subject to observed artillery fire. The mountain is not just a defensive position, it is a fire control platform, and taking it is a prerequisite for any further advance toward the Po Valley. The FEB is assigned Monte Castelo in November 1944, with limited artillery support and a timetable driven by adjacent American units rather than by tactical conditions on the ground. The first assault on November 19th fails with significant casualties. The second, on November 29th, fails under similar conditions. The third, in December, is halted before it reaches the forward German positions. After the third failure, there is serious discussion within Fifth Army headquarters about relieving the Brazilians of the mission entirely. The conversation reaches the ears of Brazilian officers and functions as a kind of institutional humiliation that settles into the formation like cold water into limestone, slowly, invisibly, and with structural consequences. General João Baptista Mascarenhas de Moraes understands that a fourth failure will likely end his division's role as an independent combat formation. He plans the February assault with methodical care. Additional American artillery support in the form of the 178th Field Artillery Battalion, with its 155mm M1 Long Tom guns, P-51 photo reconnaissance of the summit in the days preceding the assault, and a comprehensive rehearsal on comparable terrain 3 kilometers south of the objective. And he plans for the unexpected, because Monte Castelo has already demonstrated 3 times that the unexpected is the only thing it reliably produces. What he cannot plan for is Expedito Resende. The 11th Infantry Regiment of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force is not, by February 1945, the same unit that disembarked at Naples 7 months earlier. It has been changed by the mountains, changed in ways that do not appear in any after-action report, that cannot be measured by the standard metrics of military readiness. The change is interior. It lives in the particular silence that falls over a rifle company at night when men who have been under fire for weeks stop talking about home. It lives in the way soldiers begin to move, low, deliberate, never silhouetted. It lives in the eyes. The 3rd Battalion of the 11th Regiment has been in the line, with only brief rotations to reserve, since October 1944. In that time, it has suffered 23 killed in action, 91 wounded, and an additional 47 non-battle casualties from frostbite and trench foot. Authorized at approximately 860 officers and enlisted men, it musters 714 effectives by early February 1945. The shortfall represents not a single catastrophic engagement, but the slow arithmetic of attrition. 2 men here, 4 men there, a sergeant who stepped on a shoe mine on January 3rd and will not walk again without assistance. The battalion's commanding officer is Major Plinio Pitaluga, professional, methodical, aware of his own limitations in a way that makes him, paradoxically, more effective than several of his more confident peers. He has spent the preceding weeks studying German positions through a BC-17 spotting scope from 3 separate observation posts, cross-referencing aerial photographs with patrol reports, mapping every known German fighting position on his axis of advance. He counts 4 primary machine gun emplacements on the northeastern face of Monte Castelo, covering the 600-meter stretch of open slope his battalion must cross to reach the first German trench line. These are not improvised positions. Each is a ring stand, a circular concrete or stone-reinforced pit approximately 1.8 meters in diameter and 1.2 meters deep, with a parapet of sandbags and rubble providing frontal protection. The weapon in each position is the MG42, the Maschinengewehr 42, the standard German general-purpose machine gun of the war's latter years. The MG42 is not simply a machine gun, it is a suppression system, engineered to deny the use of ground to anyone within its effective range. Its cyclic rate of fire is 1/200 rounds per minute, more than twice that of the American M1919 Browning. At that rate, a trained 2-man crew can place approximately 20 rounds on a point target in the time it takes a man to rise from prone and take 2 steps forward. Effective range against area targets is 2,000 meters. A single position, properly sighted, can stop a company-sized assault cold. Major Pitaluga has 4 of them on his axis. His plan accounts for this. The 105mm howitzers of the 1st Artillery Group are tasked with preparation fire beginning at 05:45 hours, targeting the 4 ring stand positions with time-fused airburst rounds. The 155mm long toms are assigned to German reserve positions and command posts further up the slope. An 81mm mortar section is positioned to provide immediate suppressive fire on any position that survives the artillery preparation. It is a sound plan, and it begins to come apart within the first 4 minutes of the assault. At 06 hours, as the assault companies rise from their forward positions and begin moving uphill through the pre-dawn darkness, the German defenders do something Pitaluga's plan does not account for. They do not fight from their registered positions. In the days preceding the assault, German observers have identified the most likely Brazilian approach routes with sufficient accuracy to preposition 3 of the 4 MG42 crews in alternate firing positions located between 15 and 40 meters from their primary ring stands. These alternate positions are hasty fighting positions. Shallow scrapes in the shale, reinforced with flat stones, covered with camouflage netting. The aerial photographs could not distinguish from natural ground cover. Positioned specifically to exploit the dead ground the artillery preparation would create. When the 105mm preparation lifts at 05:58 hours, the German crews move. 3 of the 4 MG42 teams relocate to their alternate positions in the darkness and residual smoke. The primary ring stands are empty when the Brazilian assault companies cross the line of departure. The 4th crew holds the primary emplacement and opens fire at 06:03 hours, engaging the lead elements at approximately 380 meters from the summit. The battalion's 81mm mortar section suppresses them within 90 seconds. But by then, the 3 relocated crews are in position and firing. The effect on the assault is immediate and severe. Able Company, advancing on the left, takes the first burst from a relocated MG42 at a range of approximately 190 meters, close enough that the 1,200 round per minute cyclic rate produces a sound Brazilian veterans will later describe not as individual shots, but as a single tearing noise, like canvas being ripped in a single motion. 3 men in the lead squad go down in the first 3 seconds. Baker Company, on the right, encounters a second relocated position at 06:07 hours at a range of 210 meters, with similar results. Within 8 minutes, 2 of 3 assault companies are pinned. Major Pitaluga, monitoring from his observation post 600 meters behind the line of departure, hears the change in firing pattern within the first minutes. He calls for additional mortar fire on the alternate position, coordinates his intelligence preparation had identified as possibilities, but the pre-registered coordinates are approximations, not confirmed locations. The rounds fall. Some are close. None are close enough. At 06:11 hours, with 2 companies pinned and the assault stalling on a frozen slope at 900 meters elevation, the battalion is exactly where it has been 3 times before. Somewhere in the prone mass of men from Able Company, pressed against the shale and the frozen mud 190 meters from an MG42 that is firing in 3-second bursts every 12 seconds, Private Expedito Resende is looking at the problem differently from everyone around him. Expedito Resende is not the kind of man military history tends to remember. He is not an officer. He holds no specialist qualification. He is a private, the lowest rank in the Brazilian Army's enlisted structure, drawing a monthly wage of approximately 180 cruzeiros, roughly $4 American at the 1945 exchange rate. He carries an M1 Garand rifle and a standard-issue cartridge belt holding 8 N-block clips of 8 rounds each. He has been in Italy for approximately 5 months, in the forward line for most of that time. He is 23 years old. Born in 1922 in the municipality of Itaúna, Minas Gerais. The third of 7 children of a subsistence farmer who grew corn and beans on 4 hectares of red laterite soil in the Cerrado. His father owned a mule, a single furrow plow, and a .32 caliber revolver kept loaded on a shelf above the kitchen door. Expedito learned to shoot with that revolver at the age of 9. By his early teens, he was hunting small game with a borrowed .22 rimfire rifle in the scrub woodland at the edge of the family's fields. What is slightly unusual about him is the particular quality of attention he brings to physical problems. The habit, observed by fellow soldiers in later testimony, of studying a situation in silence before acting, of spending more time looking than most men around him think is warranted. One of his squad mates, Antonio Ferreira from Goiás, will recall decades later that Expedito had a way of going very still when something needed to be figured out. Not frozen, not frightened, but still in the specific way of a man who is calculating. What he knows right now, pressed into a shallow depression in the shale with 7 other men, is this. The MG42 firing from his left front is on a fixed line. This is not an insight that requires formal training. It requires observation, and Expedito has been observing since the first burst. The weapon has fired 11 times in 4 minutes. Each burst has come from the same azimuth. He can tell from the way the rounds strike the ground to his right, always at the same angle, kicking up the same pattern of frozen soil and stone fragments. The crew is not traversing. They are covering the primary approach route very effectively, but they are not covering everything. Specifically, they are not covering the shallow drainage gully that runs diagonally up the slope approximately 35 meters to the left of Expedito's position. The gully is not deep. At its deepest point, it offers perhaps 60 centimeters of vertical relief, enough to conceal a man crawling flat. It runs at an angle that, if followed for approximately 140 meters, would bring a man to within 50 meters of the MG42 position. At that point, the gully shallows out and disappears into open slope. But 50 meters is a different tactical problem from 190 meters. At 50 meters, a man with a rifle and a grenade is in the equation. He does not discuss this with his squad leader. Corporal Dario Mendez is 8 meters away in a separate fold of ground, shouting into a field telephone handset that is either not connecting or connecting to someone who has nothing useful to say. Expedito does not shout to Mendez. He does not raise his hand. He does not, in any formal sense, request permission for what he is about to do. He checks his Garand. 8 rounds in the chamber, bolt forward, safety off. He pulls 2 Mk2 fragmentation grenades from his cartridge belt. He puts one in his left hand. He puts the second in his jacket pocket. He shifts onto his stomach. He begins to move toward the gully. He moves the way he has learned to move in 5 months on these slopes. flat, slow between bursts, using the MG42's own firing rhythm as a metronome. When the weapon fires, he is still. When it stops, he moves. 3 seconds of movement, 10 to 12 seconds of stillness. He covers the 35 meters to the gully's edge in approximately 4 minutes. Not a single man in his squad sees him go. To understand what Expedito Resende is crawling toward, it is necessary to understand what the MG42 actually is, not as an abstraction, but as a physical object with specific mechanical properties and specific vulnerabilities known to every Allied infantryman who has spent more than 2 weeks in contact with German defensive positions. The Maschinengewehr 42 enters German service in 1942 as a replacement for the MG34. Where the MG34 requires approximately 49 man-hours of skilled machining per unit, the MG42 is built around stamped sheet metal and semi-skilled labor, requiring approximately 17.5 man-hours. It is an industrial product optimized for a war of attrition. But the reduction in manufacturing complexity does not represent a reduction in lethality. Its operating principle is recoil-operated, using a roller-locked bolt that cycles faster than the MG34's rotating bolt, the primary mechanical reason for its extraordinary 1/200 round per minute cyclic rate. At that rate, individual shots are indistinguishable to the human ear beyond approximately 100 meters. What a man hears instead is a single tearing sound that Allied soldiers describe as a zipper, or canvas being ripped, or, in the phonetic approximation most commonly recorded in American after-action reports, Hitler's buzzsaw. The weapon fires the 7.92-57 Mauser cartridge. At 190 meters, the bullet retains a velocity of approximately 680 meters per second and an energy of approximately 2,260 joules. At that range, the MG42 is not at the edge of its capability. It is firing at the center of its operational envelope. Sustained fire, the pattern used in a defensive role, is conducted in 3 to 5 second bursts with intervals of 8 to 15 seconds, managing ammunition consumption and barrel temperature. This is the pattern Expedito has been observing. 3 seconds of fire. A pause. 3 seconds of fire. 11 repetitions in 4 minutes, consistent enough to confirm a trained crew following standard fire discipline. The barrel itself is a critical vulnerability. At 1,200 rounds per minute, it reaches maximum sustained fire temperature after approximately 150 rounds of continuous firing. The German solution is the quick-change barrel system. The barrel can be removed and replaced by the assistant gunner in approximately 6 seconds, using a hinged handle that folds from the right side of the receiver. This creates a predictable vulnerability window. 6 seconds during which the weapon is offline, the gunner's attention is on a mechanical task, and the position is not producing fire. The crew in the alternate position on the northeastern slope consists of 2 men. The gunner is positioned prone behind the weapon, mounted on its standard folding bipod. The assistant gunner is to his left and slightly behind, managing the belt feed from a Patronenkasten 41 containing approximately 190 remaining rounds, roughly 3 minutes of sustained fire at the current consumption rate. The position itself is a hasty scrape approximately 40 centimeters deep, reinforced on the forward edge with a single course of flat limestone slabs. The parapet gives the crew frontal protection, but offers minimal protection against fire from the flanks or from above. The camouflage netting is effectively invisible from the primary assault route in pre-dawn darkness. From the left flank, the direction of the drainage gully, the netting presents a subtle irregularity, distinguishable from natural ground features only at close range and only to someone specifically looking for it. Expedito is looking for it. The drainage gully runs roughly parallel to the MG42's fixed line of fire, in the same general direction the weapon is pointing. For most of his approach, Expedito is moving in the weapon's blind sector. The gully does not take him in front of the gun. It takes him alongside it and slightly above it, approaching from the left rear quadrant at approximately 40 degrees off the weapon's axis of fire. This is both his advantage and his constraint. The advantage is that he approaches from a direction the crew is not covering. The constraint is that the gully shallows out and disappears approximately 50 meters from the estimated position, and those final 50 meters are open slope, no cover, fully exposed. 50 meters of open ground, no cover. 2 men with a weapon that fires 200 rounds per minute. He has 2 MK2 grenades and 8 rounds in his Garand. He has the crew's firing rhythm memorized to within approximately 1 second of accuracy. And he has something else. Something that does not appear in any technical manual. He has the specific, focused calm of a man who has already accepted the possibility of the worst outcome and has decided to move anyway. The Cerrado farmers of Minas Gerais have a word for this quality. Not bravery in the heroic sense, not the absence of fear, but something more functional and more durable. They call it teimosia, stubbornness, carrying a connotation of the specific human refusal to be stopped by a problem simply because the problem is large. Expedito Resende is, by this definition, a very stubborn man. He reaches the end of the gully at approximately 06:17 hours. He can now see the position, the slight rectangular shadow of the stacked limestone slabs against the gray pre-dawn light, the barely perceptible shape of the camouflage netting. He estimates the distance at 48 meters. He pulls the first grenade from his jacket pocket and holds it in his right hand. He keeps the Garand in his left. He waits for the next burst. You are watching one of the most overlooked stories of the entire Italian campaign. If this kind of forgotten history matters to you, the kind that never made the documentaries, never made the textbooks, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. There are more stories like this one. Most of them are still waiting to be told. The burst comes at 06:17 hours and 40 seconds, by any reasonable reconstruction of the timeline. 3 seconds of fire. The familiar tearing sound, lower in pitch than most people expect the first time they hear it, almost mechanical in its evenness. The rounds go forward and downhill into the frozen slope where Able Company is pinned, and Expedito hears, distantly below him, the sound of the impacts and the involuntary sounds of men pressing themselves harder into ground that offers them almost nothing. Then silence. He counts. He knows the interval is between 10 and 12 seconds. He decides, in the specific calculus of a man with no good options and one workable one, that he will move on the assumption of 10 seconds and accept the risk that it might be 8. He rises from the end of the gully into the open slope. He does not run. He moves at a fast crouch, knees bent, center of gravity low, weight forward, feet placed with the specific care of a man who knows that a turned ankle here is a death sentence. He covers the first 10 meters in approximately 4 seconds. He is now 38 meters from the position. He can see the netting more clearly. He can see the shape of the gunner's stall helm, just visible above the top course of limestone slabs. The second burst begins. He drops, an immediate full-body collapse onto the slope, left arm taking the impact, Garand held out to the right to keep the muzzle clear of the ground. The rounds go forward and downhill, and none of them go left, because the gun is on a fixed line and the crew is not looking left, and Expedito is on the ground at a distance below the weapon's minimum depression angle, given the geometry of the parapet. He counts the burst. 3 seconds. He counts the pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. He rises again. 28 meters now, close enough to hear the mechanical clatter of the bolt group beneath the tearing sound of the muzzle report. Close enough to smell the burned propellant hanging in the cold air. Close enough to see the assistant gunner, kneeling to the left of the gun, hands on the ammunition belt, head down, attention entirely on the feed tray. 18 meters. The mathematics of the situation have fundamentally changed. At 190 meters, the MG42 is an area weapon. It covers ground, denies movement, kills through the statistical near certainty of rounds intersecting with bodies in the beaten zone. At 18 meters, it is a point weapon, and a point weapon has a point. To engage Expedito now, the gunner must release the pistol grip, physically rotate the weapon through approximately 130 degrees of traverse, reacquire a sight picture, and fire, all while processing the sudden presence of a man who was not there a moment ago. This sequence takes a trained crew, under stress, a minimum of 3 seconds, probably 4, possibly 5. Expedito has already pulled the pin on the first grenade. He pulled it while still at the end of the gully before he rose for the first time, holding the spoon compressed with the full grip of his right hand. The MK2 fragmentation grenade has a fuse delay standardized at 4 to 5 seconds, producing approximately 1,000 fragments on detonation, with a lethal radius of approximately 5 meters. He has been holding the spoon compressed for approximately 90 seconds. At 18 meters, he releases the spoon. He counts 1 full second, the specific internal rhythm of a man who has been counting machine gun bursts for the last 20 minutes and whose sense of elapsed time is, at this moment, the most finely calibrated instrument available to him. 1 second of delay burn consumed, 3 to 4 seconds remaining. He throws. The throw is a short, flat sidearm release, the kind of throw a man makes when he wants the object to travel low and fast, to arrive before it can be seen and reacted to land inside a small target and not bounce out over the parapet. The grenade travels approximately 16 meters in a low arc and clears the top course of limestone slabs by perhaps 20 centimeters. Expedito is already moving when it leaves his hand. He moves left and forward, at an angle that takes him away from the direct fragmentation pattern and toward the right flank of the position, where the parapet is lowest. He covers 4 meters in the time between the throw and the detonation. The detonation, at this range, is not a distant thump. It is a sharp, percussive crack, the sound of the EC powder charge and the fragmentation sleeve converting stored chemical energy into pressure and velocity in approximately 0.0015 seconds. The limestone slabs absorb some of the blast overpressure but contain the fragmentation pattern within the position. The netting collapses. Something metal produces a secondary impact sound as it is displaced by the blast. The MG42 stops firing. Expedito is at the right edge of the parapet when the echo of the detonation is still moving down the slope. He brings the Garand up and fires twice in rapid succession at the gunner, who is down but moving. The MK2's fragmentation pattern has wounded but not immediately incapacitated the man. The two .30-06 rounds, at a range of less than 3 meters, resolve the situation in the most direct terms available. The assistant gunner is against the left wall of the scrape, partially shielded by the receiver body of the MG42 itself. He is alive but has a 15-centimeter gash along his left forearm and a fragment in his left shoulder. He is not capable of operating the weapon. Expedito steps over the parapet and into the position. He grabs the weapon by the barrel shroud with his left hand. The shroud is hot enough that he will later have a burn scar on his palm that he carries for the rest of his life, but he does not release it and lifts the bipod legs clear of the ground. He rotates the weapon 180 degrees on its own axis, reversing its orientation so that the muzzle now points downhill, back the way he came, toward the slope where Able Company is pinned. He does not know how to operate the MG42. He has never fired one. He has seen one fired at close range for the last 22 minutes, observing, with the same quality of still, systematic attention that Antonio Ferreira will describe 40 years later, the mechanical actions the crew performed between bursts. He has watched the gunner's hands on the pistol grip and trigger. The weapon has not been on safe since it opened fire at 06:03 hours. It is not on safe now. He finds the pistol grip with his right hand. He finds the trigger with his index finger. He finds, in the feed tray, the remaining belt, approximately 140 rounds. He depresses the muzzle toward the slope above him, where the two remaining MG42 positions are suppressing Baker Company and the halted Charlie Company, and he fires. The weapon fires. The sound, From inside the position at this range is not the tearing sound he has been hearing for the last 20 minutes. It is something else entirely. A physical concussion, a pressure event, a noise that is felt as much as heard. He holds the trigger. The belt feeds. The weapon traverses. Not because he is deliberately traversing it, but because the recoil force and his imperfect grip are moving the muzzle in a slow arc across the upper slope. He fires for approximately 4 seconds before the bolt locks back on an empty section of belt. In those 4 seconds, the MG42, German-manufactured, German-crewed until 40 seconds ago, now operated by a 23-year-old subsistence farmer's son from Minas Gerais who has never touched the weapon before this moment, fires approximately 80 rounds uphill into the slope above Monte Castelo. It is 06:19 hours. The assault has been stalled for 8 minutes. The sound travels down the slope faster than any runner could. Every man in Able Company who has spent the last 8 minutes with his face pressed into frozen shale knows the specific acoustic signature of the MG42. They know its rate. They know its direction. They know exactly what it sounds like when it is firing at them. What they are hearing now does not sound like that. The pitch is the same, the cyclic rate is the same, but the direction is wrong. The rounds are not coming downhill. The impacts are occurring uphill, above them, in the direction of the German positions. For approximately 4 seconds, the most lethal machine gun on the northeastern face of Monte Castelo is firing in the wrong direction. Wrong from the German perspective and precisely correct from every other. Corporal Dario Mendes is the first man in Able Company to process what this means. He will say, in a post-war account recorded by a Brazilian army historian in 1962, that his first thought was that he had misidentified the direction of fire. His second thought, arriving approximately 1 second later, is that someone has taken the gun. He does not know who. He does not know how. He knows only that the fixed-line MG42 has fired approximately 80 rounds uphill and has now gone silent, and that the silence where that weapon was is a different quality of silence from the silence between bursts. He stands up. This is not a formal order. It is the decision of a single corporal who has weighed the available evidence in approximately 2 seconds and concluded that the window, whatever its origin, whatever its duration, is real and must be used immediately. He stands, brings his M1 carbine to his shoulder, and shouts the only thing that is relevant, forward. 7 men in his immediate vicinity stand with him. The movement spreads laterally along Able Company's line in the way that infantry movement under fire always spreads, not as a wave, not simultaneously, but in a rapid sequence of individual decisions, each one made easier by the visible fact of the man to the left or right already moving. Within approximately 15 seconds of Mendes rising, 31 men of Able Company are on their feet and moving uphill. Major Pitaluga, at his observation post, sees Able Company rise through his BC-17 spotting scope. He does not yet know why. He does not need to know why. He picks up the handset of his EE-8 field telephone and calls the 81mm mortar section with a suppression fire mission on the Baker Company sector. And he calls it with the specific urgency of a man who understands that the window for exploiting whatever has changed is measured in seconds, not minutes. The first 81mm round is in the air within 40 seconds of his call. Baker Company's commander, Captain Rui Moreira Lima, hears the mortar rounds impacting to his right and sees, at the edge of his peripheral vision, Able Company rising on the left. He orders Baker Company forward at 06:20 hours. Charlie Company receives the order to advance from Battalion at 06:21 hours. 3 companies are now moving uphill simultaneously on a 400-meter front. The German defensive calculation, predicated on 3 mutually supporting MG42 positions, keeping the assault pinned until daylight improves observation for registered mortar and artillery positions further up the slope, has been invalidated. The left anchor is gone. The two remaining crews are now receiving 80mm mortar fire and are simultaneously aware, from the absence of the weapon that should be covering the Able Company approach, that something has gone wrong in a way their local tactical picture cannot explain. At 06:22 hours, one of the two remaining crews ceases fire and displaces rearward. The second holds for approximately 90 additional seconds before also displacing, firing a final belt as they move to cover their withdrawal. By 06:23 hours, 11 minutes after the assault stepped off, 6 minutes after Expedito rose from the end of the gully, all three German MG42 positions on the northeastern face of Monte Castelo have ceased fire. The slope is not clear. There are riflemen in the German forward trench line, additional positions further up, and the fight for the summit will continue for another 4 hours. Men will die in those hours. The battle is not over, but the battalion is moving. Inside the captured position, Expedito Resende is reloading his Garand. Monte Castelo falls at 10:40 hours on February 21, 1945. The precise moment is recorded in the 3rd Battalion's war diary as the time at which the last organized German resistance on the summit ceases and the Brazilian national flag, carried up the slope by Sergeant Olívio Gondim of Baker Company, folded inside his jacket for the entire assault, is raised over the highest point of the ridge. It is not a theatrical gesture. It is a signal, visible to American artillery observers on adjacent high ground, that fires should be shifted to the German withdrawal routes north of the mountain. The 4-hour fight from the moment the MG42 positions go silent to the flag-raising costs the 3rd Battalion an additional 11 killed and 34 wounded. Expedito Resende participates in this phase. He moves with Able Company through the forward trench line and up toward the summit, carrying his Garand and the single remaining Mk2 grenade. He is not wounded. He fires at specific targets on at least 3 separate occasions during the ascent. He does not, in any of these engagements, do anything that would be considered extraordinary by the standards of infantry combat. He moves forward, fires when there is something to fire at, keeps moving. At 10:40 hours, he is standing on the summit of Monte Castelo. Major Pitaluga's after-action report, submitted on February 23, 1945, credits the 81mm mortar section's timely suppressive fire with enabling the assault companies to resume movement. It credits coordination between Able, Baker, and Charlie companies with preventing the German crews from concentrating fire on a single axis. It notes, in a subordinate clause of one sentence, that an unnamed private from the 2nd Platoon of Able Company neutralized the primary fixed-line position on the left flank through independent action at approximately 06:17 hours. Unnamed. The report does not explain how. It does not describe the gully, the timing, the 48 meters of open slope, the grenade held with the spoon compressed for 90 seconds, the captured weapon fired uphill by a man who had never touched it before. It does not, because Pitaluga himself does not know these details at the time of writing, and the formal military reporting system of the FEB has no standard format for capturing them. General Mark Clark sends a congratulatory message to General Mascarenas de Moraes that praises the FEB's performance in terms that are, by the standards of wartime military correspondence, genuinely warm. The message is read aloud to assembled officers at division headquarters. It is not read to the men on the slope. In the 2nd Platoon of Able Company, the men who were pinned on the northeastern face of Monte Castelo know what happened. They know because some of them, rising to their feet when Corporal Mendez stood, looked left and uphill and saw, in the gray pre-dawn light at a distance of 150 meters, the unmistakable shape of a man in Brazilian olive drab, standing behind a German machine gun on a slope where no Brazilian should have been able to reach. They know who it was. They say his name to each other that evening, around a fire built from broken ammunition crates in a stone farmhouse 40 meters below the summit. They say it the way soldiers say the names of things that happened that they will never entirely be able to explain. Quietly, with a specific kind of respect that is not quite awe and not quite gratitude, but contains elements of both. Expedito Resende, from Itaúna, private, 23 years old. He is eating sea rations when they say it. He does not respond. The Brazilian Expeditionary Force returns home in the summer of 1945. The first contingent disembarks at Rio de Janeiro on July 18, 1945, to a reception that is extraordinary by any measure. Approximately 150,000 people line the streets for the victory parade. The soldiers march down Avenida Rio Branco in American uniforms behind Brazilian flags. There are flowers, there is music. There are women in the crowd who have not seen their husbands or sons or brothers in more than a year. It is, for approximately 6 weeks, the dominant public event in Brazilian national life. And then it stops. The speed with which the FEB disappears from Brazilian public consciousness is one of the more remarkable phenomena in the social history of any nation that participated in the Second World War. It is not the result of a single decision. It is the product of a convergence of political, institutional, and cultural forces that together create a silence around the FEB's experience that deepens rather than lightens with the passage of time. The first factor is political. Getulio Vargas is deposed in a military coup on October 29, 1945, less than 4 months after the veterans parade through Rio de Janeiro. The officers who lead the coup have complicated feelings about the institutional prestige that combat experience in Europe has conferred on the FEB's officer corps. The new political establishment has no investment in celebrating an army created by the regime it has just removed. The second factor is institutional. The Brazilian army does not systematically integrate the tactical lessons of the Italian campaign into its doctrine or training. The FEB's combat experience is the property of the men who had it, and when those men retire or are marginalized, the experience retires with them. There is no Brazilian equivalent of the American Official History Program, no systematic effort to record and preserve the tactical record of the Italian campaign in transmissible form. The third factor is the veterans themselves. The men of the FEB return to a Brazil that is simultaneously celebrating them and failing to understand them. The support structures that American veterans encounter, the GI Bill, the Veterans Administration, the vast network of public commemorations, have no equivalent in Brazil. FEB veterans receive a modest pension supplement and a campaign medal. Many return to the same subsistence conditions they left. Expedito Resende returns to Itaúna in September 1945. He resumes agricultural work within months of his discharge. He does not speak about the war to people outside the small circle of his former squad mates. He does not file a claim for any individual commendation. He does not attend the meetings of the FEB Veterans Association, though he is aware of its existence. The action on the northeastern slope of Monte Castelo, the crawl through the drainage gully, the 48 meters of open slope, the grenade, the captured MG42 fired uphill, is never formally documented in a way that would make it recoverable through standard archival research. Major Pitaluga's after-action report contains the single subordinate clause noting an unnamed private's independent action. The report is filed and stored in the Brazilian Army's historical archive in Rio de Janeiro, sitting in a folder with 23 other documents from the 3rd Battalion's February operations. No researcher connects the subordinate clause to a name until 1998, when historian Cesar Campiani Maximiano cross-references Pitaluga's report with the 2nd Platoon's casualty records, the oral testimony of 3 surviving squad members, and a single postcard, held by Antonio Ferreira's daughter in Goiânia, that Expedito sent to Ferreira from Itaúna in December 1945. The postcard says nothing about the war. It reports that the corn harvest was adequate and that Expedito's mother is in good health. It is signed simply Expedito. Maximiano publishes his findings in a 340-page academic volume that sells approximately 2,400 copies, primarily to Brazilian military historians and university libraries. The English-language historical literature on the Italian campaign does not reference Expedito Resende at all. He does not appear in the United States Army's official history of the Mediterranean theater. He does not appear in any British, German, or Italian account of the Gothic Line fighting. He does not appear in any of the major English-language biographies of Mark Clark or Harold Alexander. He is in the historiography of the Second World War as it exists in the language in which most of that historiography is written, a man who was not there. Expedito Resende dies in Itaúna on March 4, 1991. He is 68 years old. The cause of death is recorded as cardiac failure. His obituary in the local newspaper is 4 sentences long. It notes that he was a farmer, survived by his wife and 3 children, and that he had served in the Second World War as a member of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. It does not mention Monte Castelo. It does not mention the MG42. It does not mention the 11 minutes. The palm of his right hand, for the 46 years between February 21, 1945 and March 4, 1991, carries a burn scar approximately 4 centimeters in diameter, the specific, unremarkable, permanent record of the moment he grabbed a hot barrel shroud on a frozen slope in the northern Apennines and turned a German machine gun around. No one who sees the scar in those 46 years knows what made it. Expedito Resende did not receive a medal for what he did on Monte Castelo. He did not receive a promotion, a commendation, or a formal acknowledgement of any kind from the institution that sent him to Italy, equipped him with an American rifle, and brought him home again on a ship that docked in Rio de Janeiro on a warm July morning in 1945. He received his discharge papers, his modest pension supplement, and a handshake from a processing officer whose name he almost certainly forgot within the week. He went home and grew corn. This is not an exceptional story within the FEB's experience. It is in many ways the representative story, the story of 25,334 men who crossed the Atlantic to fight in a war that their country entered late, prosecuted imperfectly, and remembered briefly. Men who fought in mountains that most Brazilians could not have located on a map, against an enemy they had no personal quarrel with, for objectives that meant nothing to them beyond the immediate tactical fact of the ground in front of them and the men beside them. What makes Expedito's story worth telling, what makes all of these stories worth telling, is not the heroism. Though the heroism is real and documented and deserves to be said plainly, it is the specificity. The drainage gully at exactly 35 meters. The burn scar at exactly 4 centimeters. The subordinate clause in a 1945 after-action report that nobody read for 50 years. History is not made of generals and operations orders. It is made of private soldiers from Minas Gerais who count machine gun bursts in the dark and decide, at the end of the count, to stand up. There are hundreds of stories like this one still inside the FEB's archive. Hundreds of subordinate clauses in documents no one has cross-referenced. Hundreds of names attached to actions that the formal record acknowledges in a single sentence and then moves past, because the formal record was never designed to hold the weight of what individual men actually did in the mountains of northern Italy in the winter of 1944 and 1945. This channel exists, in part, to find those sentences and follow them to their end. If this story reached you, if Expedito's name means something to you now that it did not mean an hour ago, then consider subscribing. Not because the algorithm requires it, though it does, but because the work of recovering these stories requires an audience willing to sit with them long enough to let the facts do what facts do when they are given enough room and enough silence. There are more mountains. There are more men. There are more 11-minute windows in the historical record that no one has opened yet. We will open them.